It's kind of addicting, really, because it's just a lot of fun and it's kind of exciting. You know, it's kind of like fishing. You never know who's going to be on the other end. Some days it might be pretty slow, and other days it's just crazy. All right, so this is a few of my QSLs that I've gotten over the last year. A couple of them are really neat. This one, KI7 QCF, this is my buddy Forrest in Utah. And what's special about this one is he had contacted me and I was his first Morse code contact. Some people, they want to make a certain number of contacts or they want to get a certain number of countries. And sometimes it's, 25, 30 countries in just a couple hours, which is pretty neat. Ham radio, also known as amateur radio, is basically using radios and radio waves to communicate. And it's just a very broad hobby. You can use certain radios and certain frequencies to talk around the world. You can use just walkie-talkie looking radios and talk locally to your friends. It's basically a Morse code only radio built in this Altoids tin, and I've made a lot of contacts on this actually. It puts out a very, very low power. It's about 1/2 watt, which is not much, but for Morse code you can actually do pretty well. And there's a lot of science behind what's going on with the radio waves and solar cycles, and so it's kind of very easy to get into, but then once you get into it you can delve as deep as you want, really. To get on ham radio, you have to have these licenses that are issued by the FCC. You get a call sign. And it's basically to make sure people aren't going to abuse these frequencies that are allocated for ham radio. Well, you can't use them for commercial purposes to sell things and this stuff. And so with each license, you get more of that frequency range. If you don't use the frequencies allocated to ham radio correctly, they can take your license away. Some people look at it and like, I don't want to have to take a test to do this, but it's really for the betterment of the hobby because you actually learn a little bit about the behind the scenes, what the radio is doing, how the radio waves bounce off the ionosphere, how the basic electronics work. The beginner's tests are not really difficult, and there's so many online resources now. Morse code, or also known as CW, is probably the thing I enjoy most about ham radio. It's almost this musical communication that's, you think of it as this archaic language that, no one uses anymore, but it's actually a really neat way to communicate. And it's one of these skills that you can learn, but you never really master. And so I'll usually kind of go through and pick out which radio I want to use. You'll need a power supply and batteries. And then probably the most important thing is the type of antenna. There's all different types of antennas and all have advantages and disadvantages. There's not really like a perfect antenna because you need it to be somewhat portable. You need it to be effective, easy to put up and down. And it's hard to find one that does all those things. To me, that's kind of the fun part, is trying different antennas. So every time I go out, I might try something a little different. Yeah, so this is my antenna that I use a lot for the HF bands, high frequency bands on ham radio. And you can see there's multiple wires, and each wire works on a different frequency. If you're using voice, you'll need a microphone. If you're using Morse code, you'll need a CW key. Some people just make digital contacts out there, so they might need a computer or a tablet that connect to the radio. So once I get all my equipment together, I'll pick which park I want to go to. And so once you pick out where you want to go, you have to set up your equipment. Once you're all ready to go, you pick a frequency. Ham radio has a number of different frequencies to use because the ionosphere is charged by the sun, and so some frequencies work really good during the day, but they don't work at all at night, and vice versa. And then you basically call CQ. A CQ call is basically, anybody out there, can you hear me? You can answer. Seeking you is, I think, what it stands for. A lot of times with Morse code, you start out just basic exchanges, exchange your call sign, a signal report, and then maybe your state you're in or your location, and that's it. And then as you go deeper into Morse code, you get into conversational Morse code, or CW. That's kind of really neat. I mean, you can meet some really interesting people and have some really interesting conversations without even speaking. And everybody has their own style of sending Morse code. In fact, I have friends that the first letter of their call sign, I know exactly who it is just because of the way they send. She's coming up and down. You kind of strive for this like really strong signal that everybody hears you, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a very marginal contact where you can barely make them out, you can barely hear them over the noise, and that to me is really rewarding, is making these contacts they're difficult. And so the logging software a lot of us use, they'll actually give you a map of everywhere you contacted, and it'll show you the farthest contacts and how many countries you got, and that's pretty neat. And for me, going out to a park and making these contacts using Morse code is a great stress reliever. It's hard to have any worries, you kind of just are in the zone, you kind of get in this flow state. And hours go by and you don't even realize it. And I think with ham radio, I've met a lot of people that live all different kinds of lives all over the world. I actually have made really good friends with people in many different countries. Being able to go and make these really long distance contacts, it's just kind of very rewarding because you had to set up the radio, you had to set up the antenna, you had to kind of design the system to do this. You cut a wire to a certain length and throw it up in a tree, and all of a sudden you're talking to your buddy in Italy. It's really, really neat.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to discover more hobbies and visit notjustahobby.com to learn more.